Languages in D&D could really serve to be more useful. There are plenty of languages in D&D. We've all got one. It's one of the first things you get for your character. You choose a race, get some little language as a freebie, and off you go. But when was the last time you used one of those things? Sans the ever-popular Common, despite the sheer amount of language built into the system, the box, more often than not, tends to find itself a little bit forgotten about. So let's fix that. Whilst languages have plenty usage in theory, their actual application comes off as pretty niche. Pretty much anything that you come across in the realms of civilization is already in Common to begin with, and most things that aren't are usually just flavor text attached to some old ruins. For something right there on the character sheet, it has quite a limited use. Unlike using tools in downtime, you can't really decide to just utilize your languages without outside influence. Perhaps you could, write a letter, but you also run into the assumption that at the other end is a person you can speak that language to. Point being that languages are used for communication, typically with someone in the hands of the DM, so without both of you playing the fiddle, it's just a paltry jig. Sure, it's just sort of a feature made to smooth things over, preventing language barriers from becoming an issue or a hassle. But at the same time, don't you want languages to be an issue or hassle in-game? Okay, maybe issues and hassles are harsh words, but the idea is putting up some barrier in front of PCs for them to overcome, and language barriers are a type of one that I like to use. I can understand why published adventures and modules do this, as the material is somewhat detached from the printing press to the table. There's no way to know what languages the players actually playing it know, so it's the logical move to remove any needed plot progression from being behind a locked door that reads Dwarvish. It makes sense to not want to bar certain tables from interacting with parts of the adventure, assuring that no matter what you choose, you get to experience the full adventure to some degree. But the way it's done also totally cheapens the purpose of taking languages, as certain languages may never show up, languages that do have use don't lead to any significant up or downside, and it's never enough to justify taking or learning more. The other side to this problem is Common, the quote-unquote common tongue that everyone gets to know, no matter which side of the pond you're from, as it has the lovely side effect of cheapening every other language's usage. Even if you run into someone who shares a rare language with your PC, why would you speak to them using it when you could just use Common? It's assumed, and rightly so, that everyone speaks Common. Your DM isn't going to go around the table like, "This board appears to be written in Common. Does anyone know Common?" Because why would they? But that question wouldn't seem out of place for a second were the question Elvish or Draconic. Common is by far and large the most dominant language in typical D&D. To a point that other languages seem almost non-existent. Most D&D realms are filled with races of all sort of flight and fancy, but with almost zero linguistic diversity. Everything is common and only common. If you've ever lived in a place with any level of multiculturalism, you'd pop this as a bit strange. Where are the multi-language signs, streets lined in other languages, even bilinguals? It's all just suspiciously absent. I need D&D Chinatown, goddammit! It's just, where are the language barriers? The very large majority of NPCs and human enemies know Common, thus removing any form of language barriers. Most things that don't know Common are monsters anyway, so communication becomes a moot point. Out of all the humanoid NPCs that don't know Common, most of them are evil-aligned drow or other such assholes, so good luck trying for rational conversation. There are few situations in which two non-hostile parties without a common language get to speak to one another. I think there's so many interesting ways an encounter like this can go. You've got the good old make wild gestures at each other till someone gets it, or saying simple words and pointing, but there are also utility spells and items and whatnot that can bridge the gap. Why not give an incentive to players to comprehend languages or tongues? Or picture a war room with a helm of comprehending language? What about a party where the drinks are spiked with potions of comprehension? I think even the idea of a language barrier, even if there's always a way to circumvent it, can create an interesting dynamic within your world, giving it a more significant cultural depth. A lot of this comes down to making sure everything on the character sheet gets some use, because there's very little incentive to pick up languages aside from the ones you get given. Linguist gives you 3 additional languages, but why would you ever take it when everyone speaks Common anyway? An easy way to circumvent this can be as simple as add more things that use languages to your games. Ways to either make players use their languages or spells or whatever means they have to make it work, or die trying. Consider perhaps taking the party to a dwarven city where all the dwarves speak Dwarven by default. Perhaps they have to be convinced to speak Common. Perhaps they don't even know Common or have a very limited grasp of the language. And you can run it both ways. Have the party find a way to communicate before the dwarf gives up, or have the dwarf be trying their darndest to say a good hello. I'm also very interested in the idea of NPC languages, each NPC having their own history and background and what kinds of uncommon languages they could learn from that. Like perhaps your limited language party finds an ancient relic written with a language they don't know, let alone recognize, and have them scour through town trying to find a linguist to translate it for them. Or what about having a meeting with an important NPC, only to find out that your party's face doesn't know the language, and having to siphon conversation through a translator, not sure if your words are getting translated in good faith? There's an appeal to hiding knowledge in plain sight. NPCs talking to each other in words the party don't know, a sheet filled with strange symbols, an omen that you don't know even is one until it's about to bite you in the ass. Languages fill a strange niche on the sheet compared to many other skills. Whilst many skills are based on the idea of trying, rolling that d20 even though your bonus is in the negatives, languages are much more like a light switch. You know it or you don't know it. It can really make a player feel useful when they know that one language, effortlessly translating the scribe while the rest of the party can't even try. It's an interesting dynamic to consider. My personal solution to this problem is a bit more involved for both sides of the table. It boils down to heavily nerfing Common and buffing every other language, giving each language more of a worldly weight. My system changes the way languages are learnt. Instead of players getting either Common in their race's language or Common in whatever language they choose, all determined by their race, the languages players have are instead determined where they grew up. Each continent, country, or culture has its own languages that are spoken there. This is influenced by races, sure. Most orcs live where orc is most commonly spoken, and the city with all the dwarves speak Dwarvish. But none of that stops the human who grew up there to speak the same. I think Primordial is a really underutilized language, mainly for the fact that it has a unique property compared to every other one. It's dialects. Primordial has 4 different dialects, each for a different elemental plane. Oran for the plane of air, Iganan for the plane of fire, Terran for the plane of earth, and Aquan for the plane of water, which are all functionally different languages raw, elemental creatures only knowing the language for their corresponding element, but they are also just that, dialects, and any creature that knows one form of Primordial can easily speak to any creature that knows a different one. It gives some flavour to the concept of different languages without imposing a mechanical difficulty. So using that, Primordial really fits as a trader's language, with different parts of the world, especially in trade or port towns, speaking a different dialect but still being able to communicate. The idea of worldly people or travelers learning Primordial to benefit them across the seas. This dialect system makes more sense to me than the concept that everyone speaks the same old Common no matter where you go. Another thing I like to play with is inherent languages. One's more akin to raw, giving you racial languages regardless, but with a bit of a twist. I think of inherent languages as more natural or universal forms of communication. Like, no matter the culture, laughter always means the same thing. My most useful implementation of this type of language is the way I use Aarakocra. The language, not the race. There are too many languages that are just named after races if you ask me. Since Aarakocra has absolutely nothing said about it by Raw, it's a lovely playground to work with. I use it as basically birdsong, little clicks and noises that can only be made with beaks and other parts of one's birdly anatomy, and give it to all birdfolk, Aarakocra, Owlin, and Kenku from birth, allowing all of them to communicate with one another, exclusively since I bar races without the, beak part from speaking it. It also serves as a way to play with the Kenku's mimicry feature, the one where it can only speak by copying sounds that it's heard, by giving them an additional way to communicate without stripping away the whole flavour of the race. Whilst it's fun to think about languages in this way, you have to also consider the player experience. Running this system could be a total bust if your players mismatch their languages, which could easily lead to the table breaking down in communication, giving them an inability to talk to anyone from the rest of the party or any NPC. Which, if you want your players to all speak the same language, sort of just brings you back around to reinventing common. I think common exists the way that it does more so for the player's benefit than anything else. It would suck if your players in your party were unable to communicate properly since they didn't share a language. It's a failsafe. No matter what wacky races your party consists of, they will always be able to talk to one another. It's a given. But there's a line you should be drawing as a DM in order to make the game work, even if it comes at a slight cost to the unfettered cultural character creation process. Whether it's you must all come from the same place or you must all have at least passing knowledge of insert language here, or whatever thread binds you, there needs to be some precaution in place to prevent things from going south. It's a fine line to tread on. On one hand, you have the idea of culture, whether it be cultural immersion or culture shock, bringing utility to character choices and more variety for problems and their solving. But on the other hand, you have potential for communication issues, locking players out of information and solutions, or just spending too much time reinventing the wheel. But if you tread with care, keep your players and their play experience in mind, and build language into your world in a way that works, then you're sure to have a good time, exploring out the endless bounds of language utility. Just remember to have fun, and see you next time.